I've seen a lot of change, been through a
They don't
lot
they
of
don't like to deviate from
days.
how things are
Things are
done.
not the
They're very
same
traditional.
as they
You
were
know,
a
if you
year
if you
ago.
if you have a process where you have
Be
A, B, C, and
okay.
D,
I
you
move
need
on
to go
each
to
and
A, you
every
need to go to B and
day.
C and D.
The
Whereas in the U.S.,
past
if
where
you
it
can bypass B and
stays,
C
way
and go
back
right
a
to D, you
year
can.
ago.
All right, Portugal is not
I've
not so
changed
much.
for the
I think that's the thing that
better this
really
time.
you have to get used
I
to. You know,
thought
and
I
you
would
have to have a certain
never
level
be
of
fine.
tolerance and
I
a
strive
certain level of
just to
patience
stay
to deal
out
with that
of
type
the
of mentality.
way.
I think
And for the
they're
first time
traditionalists
in a long time,
mainly.
I'm alright.
I think they love paperwork.
The
Um,
road
uh,
has
how could I
been
put this? You buy anything. If you buy gas, you'll get like four different strips of paper.
but all will be okay. I move on each and every day. The past is where it stays. Way back a year ago. I've changed for the better this time. I thought I would never be fine. I strive just to
Dreaming
say
of a life in
I'm
Portugal? Or
alright.
maybe you're just curious about what it would be like to move here. My family and I began planning for our move way back in 2020. It took 2 more years to make it happen, and it has been quite an adventure. Before you pack your bags, listen in to hear the real stories of those who've already taken the leap. Every other Wednesday, we dive deep into the experiences of individuals and families who chose to make Portugal their home. Discover their motivations, the challenges they faced, and the unexpected joys they encountered along the way. We'll explore their preparation strategies, navigating bureaucracy, and the realities of building a new life in a foreign land. Whether you're seriously considering a move or simply curious about life in Portugal, these authentic accounts will offer invaluable insights and help you decide if this sun-drenched country is someplace you want to relocate to, or maybe just visit on vacation. Welcome to Mover, Portugal Unpacked.
I ain't going back, I'm not falling. I'll push all my chips and call all in. I'll bet on myself, you keep stalling. I hear destiny and it's calling. I'll keep my head.
Welcome to Mover, Portugal Unpacked, the podcast where we delve into the stories of individuals who've taken the plunge and made Portugal their new home. Today, we have a fascinating, in my opinion, guest joining us, Jose. Jose traded in his former career as a U.S. Customs and Border Protection Officer in the United States for the sunny shores of Portugal. Now retired, he's building a new life here with his wife and two of his children. While he admits navigating Portuguese bureaucracy can be a bit of a puzzle for all of us, Jose, I'm right there with you. Jose has found immense value in the sense of security Portugal offers his family, the noticeably better cost of living, and the overall healthier lifestyle from fresh food to reduced stress. So let's hear about his journey. Jose, welcome and thank you so much for
No,
agreeing to do
thank you.
this.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so as you said, I am a former government employee. I spent 33 years in the government. I retired in late 2021, September specifically, and we've been here for now almost 4 years. So I've got my we basically we're definitely what's the word I'm looking for? Stabilized.
Portuguese. Oh.
Stabilized. Yeah, we're stabilized. Yeah. I mean, the transition was, you know, easy at times, harder in other times. Obviously, it's something that, you're getting used to a different culture. I have the advantage that I had worked here a few years prior to moving here because I was stationed here in Portugal working for the US government. So I think that's when we solidified our desire to come back and possibly retire here. Although when I left here, I left with the intention to retire in Florida because I ended up in Florida. So after 5 years, the last 5 years of my government career, I spent it in Fort Myers, in Florida. and realized very quick, not being from Florida, I'm actually from New Jersey originally. Not being from there, I realized uh, very early on that I wasn't a Floridian per se, and actually missed Portugal after having left. Now that was in 2017 when I left. I had gotten here earlier in 2013, so I spent a 4-year stint in Portugal prior to moving in 2021. Um, Funny thing is that my wife and I both came back after having left and living in Florida for a couple of years. We came back to visit friends, and the minute we got off the plane, I think my wife was thinking it, or my wife mentioned it, and I was thinking it. All I know is that we both looked at each other, and we felt like we were coming home.
Yeah.
So I think that became, evident that we basically were missing Portugal. Now that actual, I think it takes someone's being here and then leaving. You know that old saying, you don't know what you have until you lose it or something, or I can't remember what the saying is, but you don't appreciate something until you don't have it anymore, right? Well, I
Right.
think that's what happened to us. We left here thinking that Florida would be the Mecca retirement place, and I realized that all the things that I was looking for, I left. I was looking for stability. I was looking for security. I was looking for good weather. I was looking for good food. I was looking for good beaches. Good, fantastic sunshine. Guess what? That's what Portugal is. In fact, as many people, refer to Portugal, it's kind of like a little bit of California in Europe, right? And it certainly is. It certainly is that. Um, you know, we also left. Um, First of all, we left because we had to leave because the 4-year assignment had terminated. However, when we left, we were kind of ready to leave. If that makes sense, we were ready to leave, thinking that okay, we were going to a new adventure, new place, and in a way, we, even though I was here and we were taken care of by the U.S. government, having been attached to the U.S. embassy here, everything was kind of done for you. We really didn't get into the mundane things of getting cable or getting electric or setting up gas in your house. Those things were kind of provided for us. So when we left with a little bit of a facility. Things were facilitated for us. Coming back, we realized, wow, okay, uh, now you have to do it on your own, right? You have to go and get your utilities, and you want your cable, and you want to set up your phone service and all that. That is very challenging as compared to the United States. The United States does facilitate things. Things here take a while. Things here are not as so. If you don't have patience, that is a that is a definite requirement. Considering how things are run here, not quite like they're run in the United States. We came here for several reasons. The main reason, I have two younger kids. I have two older kids who are already in the U.S. Are still in the U.S. I should say, and living in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. My daughter lives in New Jersey, and my son lives in Pennsylvania. And I have two kids, a little boy and a girl here, a 14-year-old and a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old, sorry, a 9-year-old. So I think when we came here with the security in mind for the kids and the family. Our main goal was to be somewhere. One of the things that really affected us in Florida were the tremendous amount of active shooter drills that the school conducted, and quite frankly, there were occasions where the schools, both my son and my daughter's schools, went into lockdown. You
Yeah.
know, and all because there was something that happened around the school. It wasn't necessarily, fortunately, um, nothing that happened at the schools directly, but something that happened around the school. And for precautionary reasons, they would lock down. They would send a text message to the parents: "Don't come to the school. There's everything's okay." But what happens? You get to the school. You see two police cars parked there, probably just uh, two guys talking, but your heart sinks because you
Yeah.
see two cop cars. That's something that my wife. One of the main reasons my wife pushed for this too, um, or I should say, agreed, was the security aspect of things in the United States, and then unfortunately, it's something that's more prevalent. Um, it looks like there's no end in sight to the violence in the schools,
That's
and
very true. And Jose, I'm a former US teacher, and this was a big motivator for us as well. And my brother is a former US I'm sorry, he's a former sheriff's deputy.
mhm,
And he had to resign his position for health reasons. He has a really weird autoimmune condition that's very rare. But he actually, I wonder if you have a little bit of the same thing that he does. He said his time as a sheriff's deputy, when you do that kind of work, it really raises your awareness
absolutely, absolutely,
to how many potential threats are out there in
absolutely,
whatever forum you want. You can fill in that blank, but knowing that, and then knowing that the rest of the United States, all of us know that I can't tell you how many lockdowns my
absolutely,
school went
absolutely.
into, and
Absolutely,
how,
yes,
yeah,
yes. No, there's a lot to what you're saying. Having been in the law enforcement community, of course, we're more privy, I guess, to information or situational threats and things like that of that nature. I mean, that did part of play a role in our decision to come here. Obviously, I do have. Uh, I think I had a leg up, I think, on most, how could I say, not a leg up. I would say I have an advantage having had a background. My father was Portuguese. My mother wasn't, but my father was Portuguese. My father immigrated from Portugal to the U.S. in the 60s. Okay. And of course, met my mom, and my mom is from Puerto Rico, was from Puerto Rico. And when they met, they constructed a life as immigrants in the
yeah,
U.S. So I'm kind of, it's funny, I'm kind of the full circle. It's like I'm doing what my father did in reverse.
yeah,
I went to, it's funny that I came to Portugal representing the country that my father immigrated to. The fact is that it's not a funny, it's actually I would say an interesting story, because when I accepted the assignment to Portugal, I was forced to abdicate, or I should say, renounce my Portuguese citizenship, because I had obtained Portuguese citizenship through my dad. Okay,
mhm,
so at the it was an official ceremony at the U.S. Portuguese consulate, when I was accepting the position to come here to Portugal. The, uh, the consul general at the time was the one who actually made me realize what was about to happen. Okay, and it was interesting to the consul general, the fact that the son of an immigrant Portuguese was now coming back to Portugal representing another country, right? So So
Yeah.
basically, it was an interesting human. What was it? What do you call those human interest stories? He actually had wanted to print it in the Portuguese newspaper, but the U.S. government didn't agree, didn't allow it. Right. But in any event, what's interesting, I think, and I'm proud of actually, is the fact that my father, who's no longer with us, but was proud that his son came back to Portugal, representing the country that he immigrated from. He immigrated to, and basically, while I was here, I was almost. It was almost it's funny because I was almost treated as as the prodigal son, if you will, right?
Mhm.
The one that came back, and even within the Portuguese, my Portuguese colleagues who worked here with us, almost saw me as a Portuguese, not so much as an American. It was interesting. It was a very interesting um, period when I worked here. But I think that's another reason that influenced me to come back to Portugal. I mean, uh, I was treated so nicely by the Portuguese and welcomed. We felt welcomed. My wife is of Brazilian origin. She's American, but of also Brazilian origin. So she also speaks Portuguese. I think that helped us. I speak Portuguese as well, although my Spanish I think is a little bit better than my Portuguese. But um, definitely the language also helped me transition better. I know that a lot of Americans are coming here not speaking the language. Some are coming here maybe speaking Spanish, which helps very much. Okay, although the Portuguese will prefer that you speak to them in English, as opposed to Spanish. Okay, I think that's because of the friendly rivalry that exists between Spain and Portugal.
There's a little
Uh,
history there, right?
there's a lot of history there. Yeah, and boy, do they let me know it too, because I'm actually half uh, uh, one culture and half of the other. So
Well, let's go back for just a minute and talk about your father being Portuguese and immigrating to the United States, and now you have immigrated back to Portugal. What are your thoughts on when my perception is that when your father left and immigrated to the United States, likely from my knowledge of the history of the culture is that he went there for better opportunity because Portugal traditionally has been a country that it's very hard to make a high income and there is some poverty here. However, the culture itself is taken care of. And then you going back, it is the culture, it sounded like to me, that you're coming back for. Um, so your
absolutely, yeah.
father kind of had to give up a very collective culture where the needs of the community come before the individual. He had to kind of give that up and go into the United States where he could make a better income for his family. So I'm just curious if any of that, if I'm
Yeah,
on the
I
right
think
track and how that kind
you're
of played
you're
itself
you're
out.
okay. My dad came from I wouldn't say a well-to-do family. I wouldn't say that, but my father came from in the town. He came from one of the two influential families in the town. So Portugal, the way Portugal, a lot of towns, and we're not talking cities, obviously. We're talking villages and small towns. Usually, each village has one or two predominant families. Okay, sometimes even three, but or one. Some villages have one predominant family, which basically means that family, um, be it the fact that they're landowners or business owners or what have you, basically are the influential family in that town. So my father came from one of two families that were of that sort. So my grandfather was a pro I hate to say the word fascist, but but he was a pro government. He leaned towards the government. Okay,
Hmm.
so did my uncle, my father's older brother. My father, on the other hand, did not. Okay, during the time of the dictatorship, there was a colonial war in Africa, which was waged. Was an attempt from the countries that were under Portuguese rule, Angola, Mozambique, Cape Verde, to name a few. These countries were waging an independence war, okay, against anti-colonial war against Portugal. So Portugal had its own version of Vietnam, okay,
Right.
and I think this war lasted 13 years, okay. Well, my father was one of the um, people that was against the government, okay, here. So obviously, from stories that I heard from my older family members, there was a possibility that the government was looking for my dad. Right. So
Ooh.
my grandfather actually smuggled my dad out of Portugal. He
Okay.
actually smuggled them. Okay. Now my dad was fortunate that one of my um, um, grandfather's sisters had lived in the U.S., okay, for many years. I mean, this person immigrated in the 40s and 50s, I think. Okay, so my father, when he left Portugal, he was smuggled through Spain. Okay, I think it's a coincidental thing that I believe a customs officer was actually bribed to allow my father into Spain, because at the time there were customs borders. My grandfather, like I said, my grandfather, having been a little bit of an influential person, was tipped off that the government was looking for my dad.
Hmm.
Okay, because they were trying to send my dad to the worst place where the war was happening, which was Guinea-Bissau. Okay, so during this time, like I said, there was this anti-colonial war going on, and as punishment, my father was being because my father could have gotten a dispensation because my grandfather was kind of pro-government, but the fact that my father was a little vocal against the government, they were going to send him to the worst place
Right.
where the war was happening. Okay, all right. Once my father was smuggled, my father ended up going to the United States. And upon arrival, my father had a job lined up for him. And my dad ended up working for United Airlines, believe it or not. He ended up working for United Airlines in the kitchen, no less, washing dishes and preparing food. Back then, it wasn't like it is today, where you have vendors that operate, that do all the food preparation and beverage, uh, loading on the aircraft. All that was done by the airline itself. And this is where my father ended up. My father ended up working there. He ended up retiring from United.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So my dad, now, like you were saying about the community, my dad ended up arriving in an area where there was many Portuguese people. Okay, because my father ended up going to Newark, New Jersey, where there was a large community of Portuguese
Hmm.
immigrants. Okay, so my father, not that he didn't learn English, he did learn English, very broken English, almost me Tarzan, you Jane type
That's similar to my
English.
Portuguese.
I grew up, my father speaking Portuguese to me.
Yeah.
I also grew up, my mother speaking Spanish to me. My friends all spoke Portuguese or Spanish. So it's kind of like I grew up having this culture instilled in me, since I was growing up, and I think that I've only benefited from it, having come back here,
Oh,
obviously.
absolutely.
Uh, I was going to say that my father, after the revolution, my father made it a point, since he worked for United Airlines, we used to have the benefits of flying, at a reduced rate. I used to come here during the summers. My father was very, he always wanted us to come here at least 1 month here and another month in my mother's homeland, Puerto Rico. So I ended up growing up since 1974, which is when the revolution um, ended the dictatorship. From 75 to 1980, we would come here and spend the summers here. We'd spend the summers. In 1980, my father attempted to live here, and I actually attended 10th grade here in Portugal.
Wow.
While I was in high school. I ended up spending 1 year here. We lived here almost 2 years. We lived here in the 80s. Back then, Portugal was suffering from growing pains, if you will. They were transitioning from a totalitarian dictatorship, if you will, fascist dictatorship, to democracy. And in the 1980s, just the governments here were just a basket case. It was just one government would fall. I think in 1 year, maybe 6 different governments
Wow.
occurred in 1 year. Okay, it was almost every couple of months the government would just topple and another party would take over. So I think my father was a little bit also scared that it was, Portugal was leaning communist almost at one point, in the 80s. And I think he was, my father tried to come here, I think, at the wrong time is what happened, 6 years after the revolution. And I think only once Portugal entered the European Union, I think in 1986 or 85, I think is when Portugal started to stabilize and become a full-fledged, European member.
Do you think that your dad missed Portugal when he was in the United States?
Absolutely. Absolutely he did. Absolutely he did. That I could tell you without a doubt that he missed Portugal. He absolutely did. He was very fond of.
You have an interesting perspective, and as a former teacher, I'm gonna have to go there because you yourself spent a year in the Portuguese school system. Your
Yes,
children are now, two of your children are now part of the Portuguese school system.
yes.
And I am curious what you think the differences between the Portuguese education system and the US education system are.
I think the main I think the Portuguese system is very what's the word I'm looking for? They're a little bit more strict in the sense of um, if they see potential in you, they tend to what's the word I'm looking for? How could I'm trying to compare when I was here studying with the way my kids are now presently here. I noticed a lot of changes. I think when I was studying here, there was no such thing as, for example, Portuguese as a non, was it PLM, which is the Portuguese non-maternal language, almost equivalent to the ESL. There was no ESL in the time that I was here. I think now kids that are coming here get a lot more support from the schools, okay, than I did even back when I was studying here. As far as comparing it to the U.S., okay, I think that it's a little bit more advanced in certain ways, okay, especially in math. I think they try to. I think the math portion of the subjects of math here, I think, are um, a little. They tend to start earlier
Mhm.
than they do in the U.S. And I think that you know they teach. They emphasize geography more. Okay, I know that in the U.S. it's geography is not necessarily something that isn't, the U.S. How can I put it? The U.S. is a little bit egocentric in a
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's less there's less emphasis on geography, and I think here I noticed my kids. Like you could ask kids here, they'll know a little bit of countries that are in Asia or countries that are in Africa. I more so than the average American student, I think. So in that regards, I think the schooling here is a little bit more universal, I guess, if you will.
So you've been here for almost 4 years. Is it different than what you anticipated when you were planning your move? Are there any things that you didn't anticipate?
I didn't anticipate. So we have, to get things done here, a lot of times you need to go through a lot of red tape. Okay. Say you want to, there are things that you have to contend with that not necessarily you have to in the United States. Okay. Here, I think in the US, I explain this to people. People ask me, what do you mean by red tape or whatever? I think in the US, they try to streamline things, whereas here, there are traditional ways of doing things. I didn't notice that the first time that I lived here, quite
Hmm.
frankly, because like I said, the U.S. Embassy would take care of our everyday needs almost, right?
Right.
So I think that in this country, there's they really stick to their process. There, there's not a lot of deviation. Okay, they don't like to deviate from how things are done. They're very traditional. If you have a process where you have A, B, C, and D, you need to go to A, you need to go to B and C and D. Whereas in the U.S., if you can bypass B and C and go right to D, you can. All right,
Mhm.
not so much. I think that's the thing that really you have to get used to. And you have to have a certain level of tolerance and a certain level of patience to deal with that type of mentality. I think they're traditionalists mainly. I think they love paperwork. How can I put this? You buy anything. If you buy gas, you'll get like four different strips of paper,
Yeah.
which is basically your receipt. Your receipt.
Huh.
They it's they don't like to streamline. It's not
Yeah.
it's not it's not done here.
They
You know,
enjoy a good
and
process. Yeah. Or a
they
bad
do, they do,
process.
they do, they do. They told me that I've asked my Portuguese family this question. I've asked, why is there so much bureaucracy? Why is why does it take so many steps to do something which you realize you don't need these additional steps? And they said basically they think it's to guarantee jobs. Portugal doesn't have the ability to absorb um, or eliminate jobs because
Yeah.
obviously you have a country here of 10 million, and if you start streamlining, you start eliminating reasons to employ people.
I think
If
there is
that makes sense.
some truth in that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely think there's some
Yeah.
truth in that. And I think this is one of the pitfalls of coming in as an expat, especially from some of the more privileged countries. We come in here and we're like, well, why is this so hard? We should do this. Actually, I see.
They take offense to that. They
Well,
take
and I,
offense. You know what I do notice? You know what I do notice? I notice Portuguese people who have lived in other countries, say Canada, US, France, Australia, and then they come back here with different ideas.
yeah.
And the Portuguese that are here basically treat those, with a side eye. They don't like it. They don't like it, and I think it's resistance to change.
I
They're
think
very
that's some of
resistant.
it. I think
Yeah.
I think expats here also have a and I don't want to call out Americans, but Americans, I think if you make a move, if you're American and you make a move to another country, your eyes are opened. And this goes back to that egocentric thing that you were talking about, that many just being raised in a country of privilege gives you this, whether you want it or not. And we come here and I did this. So I'll use myself as the example. The first time we came to Portugal, I'm like, wow, they need a generalist to go through. I think that's what it's called, and look at a lot of the language in their advertising, because they're translating things to English and it's incorrect.
Right.
Well, that's my degree. I have a degree in education. I have one in English as well. So I was nitpicky about things. And after living here, I realized that nobody, as long as you get the basic message across, they're doing that as a nicety for those of us that speak English. They don't care if it's 100% correct.
Mhm.
But they also don't want me to come in and tell them how to change it either.
No, they don't.
They're fine with it.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that we as expats oftentimes come in here and we're like, oh, well, we can make you better. And they're
right,
like,
right,
we don't
right.
need you to make
Yeah,
us better.
yeah. They
We're
take offense
fine.
to that. They definitely take offense to that.
Well,
They
and like you
definitely do.
said, in a
They
country
definitely.
where, you know, jobs are scarce and well-paying jobs are even more scarce, and people are doing what they need to do to get by, it's a slap in the face. And I think that's something that oftentimes like you said, we slow down a system or we eliminate a step and we eliminate four jobs. So I would imagine that your people that you've talked to, your relatives are probably spot on, that those
Yeah, yeah,
processes we're
yeah,
not
yeah,
fans of.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I think there's you know, this country does have a brain drain too. Okay, so how could I explain this? You have a lot of people that have. I'm not saying that the ones that are here are not innovative or not, um, you know, intelligent. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is though that, you know, the the amount of people that have left Portugal because a lot of young people have to leave the country because they get these degrees and the jobs here don't pay well. They don't pay well. Okay, and I think it's reflective in a sense in the services too. It's definitely reflected in the services. We're used to going to a restaurant and having the waiter, basically, well, actually in the U.S. you have the tip culture, right? That doesn't exist here, obviously. Here, the waiters, they're supposed to be earning a living wage, right? And they're not necessarily service oriented for that reason, okay? Because they're not working for tips, all right? So you have to get used to that as an
yeah,
expat. You have to be assertive too when you're
yeah,
when you're ordering. Be assertive, be polite, be assertive because it's not like in the US where they're trying to work tables. They're trying to rush you. There's no rush, okay? There's no
right.
rush. They're not trying to rush you out the door. They don't care if you're there 4 hours. Okay, guess what? They're not working for tips, so they don't
Yeah.
care, right? And also you see that whereas in the U.S. they emphasize service and speed, right? So they'll have 50 employees or 30 employees working in that restaurant. Here, no. Here you might have only one or two waiters or waitresses, and they have the whole establishment to
That's right.
serve, Okay, so you have to be assertive. There are times when you have to beg for the check,
Yeah.
right? You have to beg for the check. Whereas in the U.S., you get the check even before you had your coffee, right?
Yeah.
It's a different mentality. It's definitely a different mentality. It's definitely a
Well, and
different
I'm glad
mentality.
that you mentioned this because some of these are we grow up in the culture that we grow up in. And so I feel like I am in the US, I am very assertive. Here I am not. Oftentimes I find myself waiting
No, you have to be
because,
assertive. Yeah. And here,
yeah,
and here it's also there's something in Portugal called a lei da batata. A lei da batata. You know what that means? That
I
means I
don't.
don't
Read
know.
the
I don't know
potato.
why it's called the law of the potato. Okay. Let me tell you what I mean. What they mean by this. You buy a sack of potatoes, right? Usually, when you open up the bag to take out the potatoes, you look for the biggest one. We have this mentality from the U.S., that it's uncourteous to be aggressive, right? It's it's
Yeah.
it's it's dis- or discourteous, not uncourteous. It's not polite, right? To jostle in. Go. This is the way it is here, okay? And it's not perceived as being rude or anything. It's just you're positioning yourself, and you have to be assertive but polite. You can be polite, and you
Yeah.
can be assertive and polite. Now, if, you're at a restaurant and you try to catch the waiter's attention or something like that. If they don't respond, go again. It just what I'm saying. It's just cultural. I think
It
it's a
is,
big
but
difference.
there is definitely a learning curve to
There
it
is.
when it's
There is.
not your culture because you do sit and wait a lot and think, "Hello, isn't anybody going to help me?" No,
Sure,
they're
sure,
not,
sure,
not
sure.
unless you make it
I see
happen.
it. I see it when I go out and I see people that I know are just visiting. You could spot them. I could
Yeah.
spot them, and it's like they're waiting for somebody to come to your table and goes, no, if you don't say something, they're not coming.
Yep,
Yeah,
for sure. I
yeah,
agree.
yeah.
All right, so tell me because it seems like this has been a good move for you. What
Yes.
has been the best thing about moving here for you and your family?
Wow. The best thing for me. Well, I don't know to attribute it, whether I attribute it to the fact that I no longer um, am in a stressful situation, being that I'm retired now.
Mhm.
I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's just about to retire and thinking about coming here to Portugal. And I told them, I said, the first thing you're going to notice the first couple of months when you retire is that um, you're going to de-stress in a sense. It was I used the word that I wish I could recall now, but you tend to oh my God, it's a de-stress, but that's not the word I used. Oh my goodness, I can't recall the word. But one thing that I love about being in Portugal is that I feel like I have time. I have more time. Okay. And it's not based on the fact that I'm retired. It's that's just the way it is here. Okay. When
Yeah.
you go out to lunch, okay, you don't get the 30-minute lunch break here. Even people that are working here, they will take their 1 hour and a half lunch, you know. I mean, you know, it gets being from the East Coast, being from New Jersey, the New Jersey, New York area, I always had that, rush mentality. You don't have that in Portugal. I love that. I love the fact that I can actually, you know, enjoy my meal. Just actually, I mean, I see these people that are working and they take their lunch seriously. I mean,
You
some
do.
places actually close down for lunch, right? They actually
Yeah.
close
Oh, a
down.
lot of
However,
places.
you go to the post office, a public service, a public service. Okay, where would you see this in the U.S. where the post office closes for lunch for an hour? Okay.
Well, it did used to
I
be
think.
that way, like back in the 60s and 70s, but
But
let's start
today it's not
80s.
like that. Try to close down 1 hour any establishment
Oh,
now
yeah.
for
That's
lunch.
long
It's
gone.
very, very, very difficult. Here, that still exists, and I think that that in that regard, I think they have it right. Although it could be frustrating for people too, though. Okay, some people can only do certain diligences or certain things during lunchtime, right? So it does have
Right.
its disadvantage, I'm sure. But for me, I love the slow down. I love the fact that everything does slow down in Portugal.
It
Okay,
does
and
everything, good and bad,
everything.
right?
Good and bad, exactly. Good
You
and bad,
know,
exactly. I often tend to tell people ask me, what do you miss most about not being in the US? The 24 hours, right? Obviously, have that type of, facility, if you will. Um, I mean, but, you gotta give something. I mean, you
yeah,
can't. It's almost like that does. You can't have everything. Everything can't be perfect, and you're not going to be perfect anywhere you go.
exactly.
Nowhere you
Exactly.
go, right? Nowhere. But I do tend to. I think that here you get to enjoy life more.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
do too.
You know.
So, to your point, I grew up in the Midwest, Tornado Alley to be specific. And so, in the town that I live in, we have this siren that seems random to me. And the first, but then I started noticing that the siren usually goes off around 1, although that's not 1 p.m. That's not always the case. But it goes off, and it's the same siren that we use for tornadoes in the area that I grew up in. And so my Portuguese teacher, I finally remembered to ask her. I'm like, okay, there's this siren, and she's like, oh yeah, and she explained to me that we also live in a country where fires happen, and that these sirens, if they go off, they notify the bomberos that they need
Mhm.
to get in touch with the station to find out if there's a fire in the vicinity. And she said, unless it's going off around 1.
Then
And
it's
I said,
lunchtime.
it does. And
It's
she said,
lunchtime.
that's just to give everybody the reminder that it's lunchtime. So if she's like, and they forget a lot of days to do it. She's like, but if they remember, they like to do that.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you're working outside and maybe you haven't checked your watch, you remember that it is lunchtime and you
Yeah.
need
You
to
can
go
say
take your
yeah.
hour to hour and a half, sometimes up to 2 hours.
Correct.
And one of our favorite restaurants is a traditional Portuguese, and I'll give them a little shout out because I love this. It's Hibatejana. Um, we love it. But you go in there and there are whole tables of workers. Like you can tell they've been working on road crews, they've been doing construction, and they are all there and they have their jars of wine, they
Hmm.
have their beers.
Hmm.
And I mean, to your point, they enjoy their lunch. They
I'm gonna
take
tell.
that time.
I'm going to tell you one of the aspects that does bother me, I guess, when it comes to dining, if you will, in Portugal. So, say you so usually the kitchens are open between 12 and 3,
Right.
right? So, say at 4 o'clock you decide to go eat something. All right. The only thing you're going to really find are cafes or bake little bakeries that offer some
Toast mista.
tostomistas or things like that. However, if you want to have a full-fledged meal, you're going to have to wait till 7 o'clock.
Yep.
Okay. Those are things that do take a lot of people a lot to get used to, right? Because you're used to going to the U.S. and if you want to eat at 4:30 or 4 o'clock or 5, that matter, 5:30 even. If you want to, you know, you go, you have dinner at 5:30 or lunch or late lunch, whatever. Here in Portugal, it's kind of you know, it's regimented, it's
Yeah.
12 to 3. Anything after 3, okay, they're not serving you, right?
Nope.
Now,
They're not.
now here's the other thing too. Here's the other thing. Say you do come in at the latter part of the lunch period, which is 2:30 or 2 o'clock. You might not get you might not have availability of some of the items that are on the menu. That
Yep.
happens. That happens all the time. You have, how you have, here you have that, which I love. You have prato do dia, right?
Hmm.
Or
Me too.
menu do dia, right? You'll have a fish, you have a meat, you have another maybe 3 or 4 choices, and say you're really, oh wow, they have pork and clams. I love pork and clams. That's one of the dishes of the day. And you go, but let's say you went around 2:15 or 2:30, and they tell, "Oh, I'm sorry, we ran out of it." you know
Yep.
that's something that takes some getting used to, right? Because you're not used to that in the U.S. so much.
My favorite is when they come out of the gate with, here's the menu, but these are the 5 things we don't have today.
Exactly, exactly,
But I
exactly.
tell myself when that happens, I say, this is the price we pay for fresh food, and
Yeah.
I'm willing to pay it. So I
So
prefer that.
there's an old Portuguese joke, where bacalhau means codfish, right? Codfish.
Yeah.
So you go to a restaurant around 2:30, say, and one of the dishes was bacalhau, the other one was meat, and the other one is another fish, and then the waiter will say, well, you have 3 choices, okay? You have bacalhau, bacalhau, or bacalhau.
That's a good joke for several reasons because
Yeah,
there's like 100 different kinds of bacalhau.
of
So,
course, of course. Yeah. True. This is true. This is true. Hmm.
so
Yeah.
Jose, what advice do you have for, I mean, hopefully the people listening to this podcast are considering an international move of some sort. Maybe they're looking at Portugal. What advice do you have for them?
I say do it. I say do it. I gotta say, I don't say it's easy. I say come here, with an open mind. Have an open mind. Um, I will tell you this. I wish I had. If I had to do it all over again, okay, I would have come lighter. In other
Yeah.
words, I wouldn't have brought as much stuff as I brought. For instance, if I could have any advice to people, come here with an open mind, a lot of tolerance, a lot of patience, okay, and give it time. My somebody told me this when I went to Florida, and I apply it to Portugal too. Okay, when I went to Florida, the guy that I took the job that I replaced, okay, was the port director in Fort Myers. I took his position when I went. I just as a newcomer, I asked in Florida. I said, you know, what is it really like to live here, and can you give me some things of what to do, what not to do, where to go, where not to go? And you know what he said to me? I'll never forget what he said. He said, I'm going to tell you, we're leaving Florida. I'm leaving Florida. And I go, I'm retiring. I'm going to the Philippines. That's what he said to me.
Mhm.
I said, really? You're leaving Florida to go to the Philippines? Wow. He goes, well, why are you leaving to the Philippines? And he says, well, Florida, I'll tell you my take on Florida. And I apply the same logic to Portugal. All right. If you're in Florida, or if you're in Portugal, okay, in this case, if you're here 1 year or so, 2 years, 1 year, okay, in the first year, if you don't absolutely love it, you probably are not going to stay here.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that year transition, now I give people 2 years because I think the first year is always the most difficult year
I do too.
because it's your transition year. Okay. And I don't think anybody should base anything from a year's worth, to be honest. Okay. Although you may start getting, your homesickness, period where you might want to go back. And I encourage people to go back in that first year, or after that year to go back, and see how it is. You know what happened to me when I did that after 2 years of being here, I got what's called sticker shock in the US. Okay. When I realized that 2 years prior, I was paying maybe $15 for a Grand Slam breakfast at IHOP, and all of a sudden, it's not $15 anymore. Now it's $32 or $24, whatever it was. I think it was $24.99 actually. I remember, and I said, "Oh my God!" In 2 years, it went from 15 to 25. $24.99. You know that again. I mean, if you're looking at the cost of living aspect of it, by all means, Portugal beats anywhere. I think in the U.S. hands down, cost of living wise. But I think that what I said earlier about if you don't love Portugal in the first year or so of being here, you're probably not going to stay here, right?
I
And
think you're right. I think you're right. And I think, it's not a vacation. This is your new life.
no, no, no. And you know what? If I have any advice for people, it would be don't look at the place strictly with vacation eyes, because obviously, as we know, living in a place and vacation in a place are two different things altogether. Okay. I did that mistake of being somewhere and thinking, wow, this could be good. Florida, for instance, is one of
Yeah.
those. People go to Florida. Oh my God, there's no snow here. Oh, there's no snow. There's no traffic. Well, now there's a lot of traffic, but in certain areas. But you know what? Florida had its disadvantages. They had something called red tide. Here in Portugal, you know, the winters could be, I wouldn't say dreary, but they're not. It's not the summer.
Nope.
They do have the four seasons here in Portugal. Anywhere in Portugal that you're at, even if you're in southern Portugal, you're still going to have four seasons, right? You know, construction here in Portugal also is not. You need to do your homework as far as insulation goes.
Yes, you do.
You have to do your homework in finding the areas. If you look at Alentejo is very hot in the summer, very hot. That's where I lived my first 4 years here. Was in Alentejo. Okay, the heat. I mean, fortunately, it's not a humid heat. It's kind of a dry heat. Kind of like Arizona, maybe, if you will,
Yeah.
like a dry heat. You don't feel, but it's still hot, very hot. But these are the things that I definitely. I mean, again, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. Everybody has their different, you know, uh, the different outlook on things. But I definitely think I did the right move. I know I did the right move. The thing that's hardest for me is being away from my two older children. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a big factor that people need to weigh. Family. I didn't think it was going to be as hard. Okay, because they're adults. And I thought, while we go back, I'm fortunate too that my kids live on the East Coast. All right. Now,
Yeah.
say you're from California. Okay, you have to deal with, you know, more travel time. Things like that. So. But they've come visit me, and now I'm going to visit them. So we're getting used to it, and thank God for FaceTime, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
FaceTime is a great invention, and That's about it. I think if people are open-minded and are patient with the way things are, and embrace the difference. You have to embrace the difference. Okay, if you're coming here, oh, we could do things better. Or if you're having, if you have this other idea of speed over what is it, quantity over quality, if you will. That's not gonna work here.
No, you have to adapt.
You
And so if
definitely
you're
have to adapt.
coming here planning on being whatever your country of origin is, that here, it does work for some people. We have whole communities of people who just stick together, but they usually have a lot of money to be able to isolate themselves from the actual culture here. And I
Mhm.
think that I personally think that's a little short-sighted because I think the Portuguese culture is a beautiful one. But
Well, I do too, but I'm a little biased.
yeah. Ironically, my maiden name was Bias, so I may be as well.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Jose, I really appreciate you agreeing to do this. Do you have
No,
anything else that
been my
you'd like
pleasure.
to talk about before we say goodbye?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it. I think uh, that it's a very big step, obviously. If people are looking for example, I mean, another positive aspect of Portugal is the health facilities that are here. There's some wonderful health facilities here. People, I don't know if when they think of Portugal, if they realize that it is it's pretty advanced, even within its limitations of having you know what we alluded to earlier. People do have low salaries, things of this nature, but you have quite good facilities here, and you have. I mean, my wife and I, you know, we don't really partake so much of the government services, health services, because universal healthcare does exist here.
Hmm.
But if you have an insurance, a health insurance, which is relatively, I mean, so much cheaper than in the U.S. I mean, I
It's
think we spend.
affordable.
It's affordable, very affordable. I think we spend 189 for a family of four, and
Yeah.
we have the level two health insurance. We don't have the level three, which is I think 450 or something like that, which is still not bad. We have the level two, not the level one. We have, we're in the middle, and we're so surprised at how much we are covered. We're covered,
Yeah.
even for God forbid, oncology. We're covered. I mean, where in the states can you say that? I mean, if you live here, you don't have to fear losing your house, because of medical. That alone is just peace of mind. And I
100%.
think that's the main thing about Portugal. It's the peace of mind that you get here.
Yeah.
You do. I mean, it's just, it's a safe country. It's a politically stable country now. We could say that. It's very politically stable. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine now being in the U.S. now, to be honest. With all the division that there is, and not to get political, right? But I don't know. I think we're better off here. We really are. And even my kids, who unfortunately cannot come because they also have state jobs. Um, so they're looking at that pension as well,
Yeah.
in the future. And this is what they're striving for. Now it's their turn now. It's their turn,
Yeah.
uh, you know, the advantages that we're giving our kids here too is the fact that if they become Portuguese citizens, or even if they're just residents, but they'll be able to partake of the universities in Europe. They can go anywhere. They
Yep.
can go anywhere in Europe. My son's already looking at Austria. He loves Austria. for some reason. And, you know, I don't know. I think that's, there's a lot to be said about their futures. You know, we did this for them as well, you know, for our kids' future. So if you have kids, it's not a bad place to be.
I agree. Jose, again, I really appreciate you coming on and
No,
sharing your
no, it's my
journey.
pleasure.
Thank
It's my
you.
pleasure. My pleasure.
I hear destiny and it's calling. I'll keep my head up high through the downs and lows, and we're all going in life. Still nobody knows, but I'ma choose what's right and take what comes and goes. And ain't no one in life holding me back no more.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is the song A Year Ago by Nefex. If you know someone contemplating a move or visit to Portugal, please share this podcast. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access it and sharing it with others you think would benefit from it. You can find Mover Portugal Unpacked on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, and Buzzsprout. All links to all platforms can be found in today's show notes and at totspot.com. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Just a gentle reminder, Mover Portugal Unpacked is for entertainment purposes only. It should not take the place of professional or legal advice. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own. They reflect nothing more than that. All experiences are expressed through the filter of the individual. And hey, this is Portugal. We can all have very different experiences doing the exact same thing here. So please, do your own research and discuss your options with qualified professionals before making this or any other decision. And a final note, any opinions or thoughts expressed during this podcast are not meant to malign any group or organization. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for unpacking today's portion of The Path to Portugal with me.
Way back a year ago,